All right, Shabbos, good morning. Let us begin. Gemara Chasima Tova. Begin by thanking our sponsors. Thank our TALMUD TORAH sponsors for the month of Tishrei, Avram and Shaindy Kelman, in memory of their parents, Jack Bennett, in honor of Givati Brigade First Sergeant Nikolai Rappaport, Dr. Linda Weinberg, in loving memory of her husband of 53 years, Dr. Paul Weinberg, Peretz Moshe ben Avraham David. Our week of learning sponsors, Hilary, Jacobson-Kent, and Yisrael Doniel Jacobson, in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Mordechai, Menashe, ben Shirmeyahu. The Rosen and Miller Families, as chus for Shlema for Chaim Yosef, ben Beitzah. And our Daf Yomi sponsors today, Hirsh, Gail, and Victor Goldberg, in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Hirsh and Victor's mother, Ida Goldberg, Itka Bas Aaron. We hope that in the merit of our TALMUD TORAH, the Neshama Slav and Aliyah, and all of those who require a refuah will have one together with Kol Cholei Yisrael. But with that, let us begin. Today's daf is Daf Tes, a very, very, very exciting daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is Daf Tes. Hopefully you did a little bit of your homework. We're picking up, and it just was a few lines. We're picking up on the bottom of Ches Amud Beis, last line 8b. Amar Rabba. Rabba says as follows: Shachat tzipor me'erev yamtiv. If a person went ahead and shechted a bird on Erev Yamtiv. So again, up until now, the sugi that we've been focusing on is in the event that one goes in and shechts on Yamtiv, a chaya on Yamtiv, and therefore if you shecht a chaya, there is an obligation of kisui hadam. So we've been discussing under what circumstances are you permitted to go ahead and potentially utilize dirt that was prepared before, dirt that wasn't prepared before. We've had a whole variety of different circumstances. Here, Rabbi is coming along and saying as follows: if you shechted a bird on Erev Yamtiv, ein mechaseno sob Yamtiv, you cannot cover the blood on Yamtiv itself. Now take a look at Rashi. Last Rashi on the daf. Ein mechaseno sob Yamtiv, tahayalo lechasos miba'od yom. For the simple reason, you should have covered it before Yamtiv. You should cover it before Yamtiv. Mishum imnui mishum simchas Yamtiv laka, de mishum lo mechasidam lo misar sipar b'achilav. So Rashi is saying two things over here. So first of all, if you shechted Erev Yamtiv, you should have covered it when? Erev Yamtiv. And if you didn't do so on Erev Yamtiv, you have no license to do it on Yamtiv itself. What about the fact that maybe I'm going to lose out on Simchas Yamtiv? So remember, we mentioned this yesterday, that halacha l'maisa, failure to perform the mitzvah of kisei hadam doesn't what? Doesn't prevent you from eating. So at the end of the day, you could eat the bird regardless, but halacha l'maisa, you can't go ahead and cover the blood on Yamtiv, since you should have done it before Yamtiv. Top of test. This is very interesting. Gilgal eats Isa me'erev Yamtiv. What happens if you made a dough? You made a dough on Erev Yamtiv. Mafrish mimena chalosa b'Yamtiv. You can go ahead and separate challah from it on Yamtiv itself. And I will say this is a very unique halacha. Why? Take a look at Rashi. Gilgal Isa me'erev Yamtiv. Mafrish mimena chalosa b'Yamtiv. V'afa gav this on the kamon. Elu hein mishum shavos. Ein magbiyin shumas ma'asros b'Yamtiv. Now we're going to see later on that halacha l'maisa, we don't really separate out shumas and ma'asros on Yamtiv. Now the reason we don't separate out Shumas and Ma'asros on Yom Tov is why I was saying, because again, Tikkun Man, it has the appearance of a malacha. Because think about it, when you go ahead and you tithe something, what are you effectively doing? You're fixing it. So therefore, Midrabana, we don't separate out Shumas and Ma'asros on Yom Tov. Now, what's interesting over here is as follows: Afilu hachi mafish. Now, I will say, if that's the case, remember the case over here is I made a dough on Erev Yom Tov. And I didn't separate out challah from it. So now the Mishnah is saying, the Gemara is saying over here, you can separate out that challah on Yom Tov. Rashi says, why is that? Shelo gazru al shumas isa shay mutar legalgula b'Yom Tov ulafosa ukidei lechol paschama. See, here's what's interesting. Why can you separate out challah on Yom Tov itself? Because we're going to see this in just a moment. Because since you're allowed to bake bread on Yom Tov, right? You're allowed to bake bread. There's no problem baking bread. So because you're allowed to bake bread, by definition, Chazal were never goes there on the removal of challah on Yom Tov as well. Right? Fascinating. Since you could bake it, therefore you're permitted to go ahead and separate challah from it as well. Now, interestingly enough, along those same lines, even if you made the dough Erev Yom Tov, you're permitted to go ahead and separate out the challah on Yom Tov itself. So the Gemara says, Avua de Shmuel Amar, the father of Shmuel said, Afilu galgal isa me'erev Yom Tiv, ein mafresh mimena chalasa b'Yom Tiv. Now the father of Shmuel disagrees. He says, no, if you went ahead and you made a dough on Erev Yom Tiv, you may not separate out challah from that dough on Yom Tiv itself. Now look at Rashi. Eino mafresh hemena tilo hetira lahafresh challah ela beisa shenisgalgal b'Yom Tiv. Aval zu hayla lifrosh me'erev Yom Tiv. The Rebbe says on a very simple level, the Gemara says, it's true. You're allowed to go ahead and separate challah on Yom Tiv. When are you allowed to separate challah on Yom Tiv? When you're making a dough. Okay, so if you're making a dough which you have a license to do, then you can separate challah. But if halacha l'maisa, you went ahead and you made the dough erev Yom Tiv, you have no license to separate out that challah on Yom Tiv itself. Lema pliga Shmuel adavua. So is it possible that Shmuel argues on his father? Suppose now you have Shmuel's father saying that if you made a dough erev Yom Tiv, you cannot separate out challah from that dough on Yom Tiv itself. Now Shmuel comes along and Shmuel says as follows: Damar Shmuel, chalos chutz la'aretz, ochel va'olech, v'achar kach mafresh. Interesting halacha. Shmuel said that when it comes to the challah of chutz la'aretz, now both remember again, the obligation to separate out challah in chutz la'aretz is only midrabanan. So Shmuel says something very interesting, that halacha l'maisa, pretty much what you could do is you could eat your loaf, and just leave over a little bit of challah at the end. In other words, normally, how we mafresh challah, even contemporarily, how you mafresh challah, on the front end of things. Shmuel said that since challah in chutz la'aretz is dirabanan, you don't really even have to proactively separate it out at the beginning of consumption or at the beginning of production. Rather, you could eat. Just make sure you leave a little bit over at the end. Now, I will say, what does that show you? That shows you that the separation of challah is not really a necessity for consumption. If the separation of challah is not necessary for consumption, then the act of removing that challah shouldn't have the appearance of what? Of tikkun. If it doesn't have a problem of tikkun, then what? Then it should be permitted on Yom Tiv, even if the dough was made before Yom Tiv. So now we seem to have a little bit of clash between a father and a son, which unfortunately is not uncommon, but if we could try to resolve it, that's certainly, again, what we would like to do. The Heshiv Leivavos Alvanim V'Leiv Banim Alavosim. So how do we reconcile these two ideas? So we'll say, take a look at Rashi just a moment. Ocha v'holich, kol hapas. So Shmuel says you could eat the entire loaf, u'mishayir kidei challah, and just leave over a little bit for challah at the end, u'mafrisha ba'achrona. Alma, hafrashasa shelo tzorchi. So you see that the separation of challah is not an indispensable necessity. So he goes, so look at the back of the Gemara. Amarava, Mila Mode Shmuel Shemkara leHashem Shasur Lazarim. So it's true. Whereas Shmuel might say that you don't have to separate out the challah from chutz la'aretz until the end of consumption, doesn't Shmuel agree that if you separate it and you call it challah, that it becomes aser to who? Non-kohanim. So you see that even though the separation, or the proactive separation, may not be halachically mandated, the act of separation itself designates it for kohanim, and ultimately, again, is purposeful. So we'll say, so the Gemara wanted to suggest that because Shmuel maybe doesn't require the separation of challah from challah chutz la'aretz on the front end, that must mean that what? The separation of challah is not really purposeful. Kamash malan, it is purposeful. V'haraya, when you separate it and you designate it for kohanim, non-kohanim can't go ahead and eat it. He says you have to do it on the front end, but lamaisa, the act of separating it is still considered to be a tikkun, is still considered to be purposeful, and therefore even Shmuel might agree that halacha lamaisa, if you made a dough on Erev Yom Tiv, you cannot separate challah from it on Yom Tiv itself. And I both say that is in fact how we paskin. So halacha l'maaseh, if you make dough on Yom Tiv, you can separate out challah, because the same way that you're permitted to go ahead and make bread on Yom Tiv, you can separate challah on Yom Tiv. But if a loaf was made on Erev Yom Tiv, halacha l'maaseh, you cannot separate out that challah on Yom Tiv itself. Incredible. Good, well, so that brings to a close that sugya. By the way, same idea, I should also mention, same idea with kisei hadam. That halacha lemaisa, again, we're not going to get in, well, maybe if we have time we'll get into it today, because the Shulchan Aruch actually goes through all of the cases that we did in yesterday's daf about the shovel in the ground, the finely granulated earth. But lemaisa, one thing that's clear is, if you shechted an animal on Erev Yom Tiv, you can't do kisei on Yom Tiv itself. You went ahead and you made challah on Erev Yom Tiv, you cannot separate challah on Yom Tiv itself. Good. Says the Mishnah. Both say really fascinating. Beis Shammai omrim, ein molichin es asula mishovach l'shovach. So Beis Shammai says, you cannot move a ladder from shovach, both say, is a dovecote. A dovecote. What's a dovecote? It's a house for doves, right? Essentially, it looks like a multi-unit birdhouse, right? So what you have, right? You just have a bunch of little rooms in there, and the doves go there. So the Gemara says, Beis Shammai omrim, ein molichin es asula mishovach l'shovach. Beis Shammai says, you cannot move a ladder from one shovach, from one dovecote to another dovecote. However, aval mateu mechalon lechalon. What can you do? You could tilt, so let's say the ladder is fixed in place. When I say not fixed in place, the ladder is in one place. So Beis Shammai says you can't pick it up and move it. But what you can do is tilt it. Tilt it. So the Gemara, Beis Hillel matirin, and Beis Hillel says that halacha l'maisa says motor. Rabbis both say this goes on, Beis Hillel holds, you can even pick it up and move it from dovecote to dovecote. Okay, what's the machlokes over here? So says the Gemara, good. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Chana bar Ami, machlokes b'Rosh Harabim. So we'll say, Rav Chana bar Ami says, first of all, the machlokes over here is in Rosh Harabim. Right? When you want to move the ladder through the public arena, remember again, carrying on Yom Tiv is permitted. We'll discuss the logic of that, but carrying on Yom Tiv is permitted. So Rav Chana bar Ami says, when is there a machlokes? When you're carrying the ladder through Rosh Harabim. What's the problem? Here we go. This is fascinating. The Beis Shammai Savri, Haroeh Omer Latiach Gagahu Tzarich. What is Beis Shammai say? Beis Shammai is concerned that if you're carrying a ladder through the Rosh Harabim, what does it look like? That you're going to repair your roof. So it's like, or it has the appearance, when you're walking around with a ladder, it has the appearance that you're going to do malacha. You're going to do malacha. And therefore, again, Beis Shammai will say, you're not allowed to do it. Beis Hillel say, Shovcho mochiach halav. Beis Hillel will say, this was interesting. Now, literally, Beis Hillel says, your dovecote shows everyone that you're not going to repair your roof. Now, what does that mean? If you look at Rashi, it's the third white line in Rashi, Shovcho mochiach halav, Shovcho shal sula mochiach, shehu nikar, shehu shal shovach. So this is very interesting. So apparently, dovecote ladders look different than regular ladders, right? So therefore, the fact that you're carrying a dovecote ladder will show people you're not going to fix your roof. You're going to retrieve doves for Yom Tiv. However, Avol, B'Rishus HaYochid, Divrei HaKol Mutter. But say, but in Rishus HaYochid, everyone agrees, meaning even Beis Shammai agrees that it's mutter to move the ladder. So we'll say, it's fascinating. According to this first approach, Beis Shammai's issue is one of what? Marasayim. That what you're doing when you walk through the Rosh Hashanah carrying a ladder, it has the appearance that you're engaging in wrongful action, i.e. repair of your roof on Yom Tiv. Beis Hillel, I want to be clear, Beis Hillel doesn't go ahead and say that Marasayim in general isn't a problem. Just Beis Hillel says there's no Marasayim here. Why not? Because it's a specialized dovecote ladder. So everyone knows that you're going to go ahead and take doves. We'll say, now watch this. So the Gemara says, Ini, is that so? So we'll say, here's what's fascinating about this. Apparently, Beis Shammai holds that there's no din of maris ayin b'rshus hayochid. So Beis Shammai will hold that the only time that maris ayin, the appearance of wrongful action, poses a problem is when you do so in the public domain. But whatever you do in the private domain, as long as you know that it's legal, ultimately it's mutter. So Gemara says, Ini, is that true? Now we'll say, this is a fascinating machlokes. V'amar Rabbi Yehuda amar Rav, kol makom she'asru chachamim b'pnei maris ha'ayin, afilu b'chedrei chadarim aser. But we have a principle. What's the principle? Any time that Chazal answered something, alts maris ayin, it's aser even b'chedrei chadarim. Now, we'll say chedrei chadarim means what? Even in private. Even in private. So let's take a moment to talk about this. Just take a moment to talk about this. Which is, here's what's fascinating. We have a concept of marasayin, which is you can't engage in the commission of something, or you can't engage in an action that has the appearance of being wrong, even if in fact it's not. Comes along Rabbi Yehuda bar Rav and says, whenever there's an isser of marasayin, it applies even in private, which also tells you that there are two dimensions to marasayin, right? Dimension number one is shema yilmadu, right? A concern that if people see me doing something, right, people will assume that what? Silver's a pretty decent guy, according to most opinions, right? And therefore, if he's doing something, it must be that it's mutter. So there's a concern that people will come to learn from my actions. And remember, when somebody, let's just use this case, someone sees me carrying a ladder, they may assume, I guess, Silver's going to fix his roof. I guess fixing the roof ultimately is permitted on Yom Tiv. That's element one of marasayin, the more well-known dimension. There's another dimension, which is the concept of v'yisem nikiyim. That in life, I'm not supposed to engage in actions or activities that are suspect. It's not a din in anyone else. It's a din in me. That my actions should stand on their own and not require explanation. I will say, it's a fascinating yesod in life. Sometimes we do things, and when I do something, it requires like a whole bunch of Rashi, right? No, this is not wrong. Let me explain to you why this isn't wrong. So what Marasayan almost says is, if you have to explain why it's not wrong, chances are it's not a good idea to do it. So if it requires Rashi, don't do it. Especially sometimes what I do requires Rashi, Ramban, a little Svarno, a Binabachia, right? Dasakinim. I need a whole bunch of Mefarshim to explain why it is that it's not problematic, not a good idea. So we'll say, so it's two different dinim. One is a din for others. I shouldn't engage in actions that have the appearance of being wrong, lest others come to learn from me, mistakenly learn from me. And number two, v'yisem nikiyim. A person's actions should stand on their own without clarification or without explanation. What I do should be, in and of itself, apparently, visibly correct. So I will say, it's interesting what's the nafkamina between those two approaches. The nafkamina between those two approaches is, do I have to be concerned for maris ayin birshus hayochid? So comes along Rabbi Yehuda, the name of Rav, and says, any time that something is asr, Alts maris ayin, it's not only usher in the public sphere, it's usher in the private sphere as well. To which the Gemara says Tanahi. In reality, this is machlokas Tanan. So we'll say this is a yisodistic machlokas by maris ayin. Watch this case. Tisanya shotchan b'chama avalo kineged ha'am. But listen to this fascinating case. You're walking home from shul. It pours. You get home. Your clothing is soaked. So what do you want to do? You want to dry it. How do you dry it? Do you want to hang it out? So the Gemara says over here, you can go at shotchan b'chama, you can put it out in the sun, avalo kineged ha'am, but you cannot hang it out publicly, right? In a public fashion. What's the concern of hanging? So I will say, by the way, just so you know how this could come up. So imagine in front of your house, you have like a railing. So you can't take the clothing and hang it up on your railing in front of your house where it's visible to everyone. Why? What's the concern here? What does it look like? That you laundered clothing on Shabbos. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon Osrin. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon say, even if it's not in public, it is also going to be aser. So both say, you see from here a fundamental machlokas in marasayin. Does marasayin only apply in the public sphere, or does it apply in private as well? Fundamental machlokas. Se'ikad amri. Others say, Amrav Chanan bar Ami, machlokes birshus hayachid. Supposed to others have a different version of this machlokes. The machlokes beisham. Because we're jumping back now to the Mishnah for just a moment about moving the ladder of the dovecote on Yom Tiv. So Rav Chanan bar Ami says as follows: the machlokes is in Rosh Hayachid, right? Can you move the ladder in Rosh Hayachid? The Beishamai isluhu de Rav Yehuda Amarav, because Beishamai Rabbi say are choshesh for maris ayin even birshus hayachid. And therefore they will say, you cannot move the dovecote ladder even in Rosh Hashanah out of concern that it looks like you're going to plaster your roof. Ubeis Hillel, less Rav Yehuda Amarav, and Beis Hillel does not subscribe to the view that Maris Ayin applies in Rishus Hayachid. Aval, but everyone will agree, Rishus Harabim, Divrei HaKol Aser, but everyone will agree that to move the ladder in Rishus Harabim ultimately will be Aser. So Lema Rav Damar Kebei Shammai. So we'll say, here's what's interesting. So according to this second approach, you're setting up the position of Rav like Beis Shammai, which is interesting because we would assume that Rav would have really normally aligned himself with Beis Hillel, to which the Gemara says Tanoihi. In reality, as we mentioned before, this whole thing is a machlokes tanoim. Disanya shotchan b'chama avalo kineged ha'am. Same case was as you said before. Your clothing gets wet. You want to hang it out to dry, so you can hang it out in the sun, but you cannot go ahead and hang it out in public. Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Shimon Osrin. Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shimon both aser, because they say Maris Ayin applies even in private. Amid Beis, Masnisin v'lo kiyaitana. So we'll say, so therefore again, we'll pause here for just a moment. The Gemara says over here, the Gemara is explaining, so therefore it turns out that the machlokes, at least according to the initial approach, with Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel in the Mishnah, is a machlokes about Maris Ayin. Beis Shammai is concerned with allowing you to move a ladder on Sha'an Yom Tiv, even though it's a dovcoat ladder, because it can have the appearance that you're going to plaster your roof. Beis Hillel says, there's no Maris Ayin here. Why not? Because a dovcoat ladder looks different that we'll call the utility ladder. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, no one's going to get confused. Now the machlokes Beis Shammai Beis Hillel is, where is the machlokes? Now there's a machlokes in the parameters of their machlokes. Do they argue only in Rishus Harabim, but in Rishus Hayachid they'll say it's okay? Or do they both agree that in Rishus Harabim is problem? I'm sorry. Or is the machlokes even in Rishus Hayachid? And it turns out that the machlokes Yesham Beis Hillel is really a more fundamental machlokes in Maris Ayin. That where does Maris Ayin apply? Does it only apply in the public sphere, or does it apply in the private sphere as well? And again, as we discussed, that machlokes is mivusas. It is based on the two different components of Maris Ayin. I have to be careful lest other people learn from my actions. And number two, I have to be careful that my actions are able to stand on their own without explanation. So we'll say it's interesting. The first approach, Maris Ayin, is really a din in the other. The second approach, Maris Ayin, is really a din in me. It focuses me on making sure that the way I live is beyond reproach. That my actions don't require further hezber. That my actions ultimately can stand on their own. An incredibly profound yisod. So Maslis lo ki'aitana. Our Mishnah does not reflect the view of the following Tana. How? So this anyo, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, Modim Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, Shemolichinas Asulam Mishovach L'Shovach. Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai agree that you can move the ladder from one dovecoat to another dovecoat. Very interesting, I will say. So according to this Tana, listen to this. According to this Tana, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel agree that halacha l'maisa to move from one dovecoat to the next, that's fine. What's the machlokes? Lo nechluku elo lahachzir. I will say, what is their machlokes? Their machlokes ultimately again is, can you move it back? After you move it, so you want to move it from dovecoat A to dovecoat B to retrieve doves from dovecoat. Just to point out, the whole reason you're moving the ladder, remember, is why? To get doves to shecht on Yom Tiv. Right? So now, according to this approach, the machlokes is not moving it from dovecoat A to dovecoat B. It's moving it from A to B. That's motor. But then the shaila is what? Can you move it back to A afterwards? Beis Shammai omrim ein machzirin. Beis Shammai says you cannot go ahead and move it back. Beis Hillel omrim af machzirin. And Beis Hillel says, yes, you can even go ahead and move it back. So we'll say, so what's the machlokes? So Amar Rav Yehuda, b'medram amurim, when is this? So, besulam shel shovach. Right? What is this talking about? This is talking about the ladder of the dovecoat. Avol, that's where there's machlokes. Avol, besulam shel aliyah. But when you're talking about the sulam of an aliyah, we'll say now sulam of an aliyah means an attic ladder. Right? It's an attic ladder, which means a non-shovach ladder, divrei hakol aser. Everyone will agree that it's aser. Now why? Because we'll say now apparently, according to this approach, with an attic ladder, everyone will agree you cannot move that on Yom Tov because it has the appearance that what? You're going to fix your roof. Right? That's utility ladder. Rabbi Dosa says, Mateo mechalon lechalon. Rabbi Dosa says that what can you do? You can go ahead and tilt the ladder from one window, from one dovecote. Chalon bosa in this context means window of a dovecote, right? From one window of a dovecote to another window of a dovecote. Achirim omrim mishum Rabbi Dosa af medadin bo. So listen to this. The achirim sinin Rabbi Dosa, I will say medadin literally means to hop or to skip. What it means in this context, here, take a look at Rashi. Medadin bo im hacholon rachok ve'ein rosh hasulam magia sham batia medadin raglov shal sulam ma'at ma'at. So let's say, listen to this. Let's say you need to move the ladder from one window to another, but you can't move it for whatever the reason. Let's say, for example, it's a sulam shal aliyah, so therefore you can't pick it up and move it. What you could do is hop it. So hopping it means you would move it essentially one leg at a time. Right? I don't know, there must be a better term than hopping it, but you understand. Right? So that's medadin, but let's say that you could do that. So the Gemara says, Bnei Rabbi Chia, listen to this case. Bnei Rabbi Chia, nafak l'kiryasa. The sons of Rabbi Chia went out to the villages. They had fields out by the villages, so they went out to the villages to see how their fields are doing. Ki asu, when they came back home, Amar lehu avuan, their father said to him, Rabbi Chia, their father said to them, Klum ma'aseh bal liyadchem, said, my sons, did anything come up? Right? Any interesting shilas come your way that you paskind on? Amru, they said, Father, yes, sulam ba liyadenu v'hitarnu. The case of a ladder came up and we were matter it. Okay, well, what does that mean? Take a look at Rashi. Sulam ba liyadenu holachas sulam shal aliyah l'shovach. So we'll say somebody asked them the following shaila, which is, I have a ladder, an attic ladder. They will say, understand, attic ladder is just another way of saying what? A non-dovecote ladder. I have a regular ladder, and on Yom Tov I'd like to move it ultimately again from one dovecote to another dovecote, or to a dovecote. So that was the shayla they asked Rabbi Chia's sons, and Rabbi Chia's sons said, mutter. Rabbi Chia says, Amar lahem, su'u v'asu mashe tartem. You better go back out there, right? And aser that which you were matter. Never a very fun or popular thing to do, right? I know I told you mutter, but it's really aser. Why? And I will say now, what happened over here? Listen to this. Inu savar. So where was their mistake? So Inu savar, the sons of Rabbi Chia felt as follows: Mi dekam Rabbi Huda besulam shalaliyah lo pligi. From the fact that ultimately, again, Rabbi Huda said that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel don't argue; they agree that in a case of sulam of aliyah, an attic ladder, that it is asr to move it on Yom Tiv. Michlal the Tanakama savar pligi. They inferred from that according to the Tanakama, it is a machlokes, which means that Beis Hillel would even allow you to move an attic ladder on Yom Tiv. Velohi. And in fact, they were mistaken. Why? Rabbi Huda ta'amei de Tanakama kamefarish. Rabbi Huda was in fact explaining the position of the Tanakama. The Gemara says, Mimai, b'diktani molichin asasulam mishovach l'shovach, since the Mishnah said that you could move the ladder from one dovecote to another dovecote. Now we'll say, that lashon only makes sense if what? If you're talking about the ladder of a dovecote. These sakadaitcha besulam shal aliyah pligi, because if you think that it's talking about an attic ladder, haimolichin asasulam mishovach l'shovach, but instead of saying you can move the ladder from one shovach to another shovach, molichin asasulam l'shovach mibayile. So let's see, here's the difference in lashon over here. If you're talking about the ladder of a dovecote, then the lashon of moving it from dovecote to dovecote makes sense. Why? Because that ladder is already by the dovecote. So it's only a shayla moving it from one dovecote to another dovecote. If, however, you understand that the discussion is focusing on a sulam shal aliyah, an attic ladder, then the right way to phrase it is how? You can move the ladder what? To a dovecote. What does that mean? Because remember, where is that ladder starting off? Right? Not at the dovecote, in your attic somewhere else. So the proper lashon would be not that you can move the ladder from dovecote to dovecote, but that you could move the ladder to a dovecote to begin with. To which the Gemara says, Elaf hachi kamar. This is what it means to say, Shal shovach in, shal aliyah lo. Really what they were saying is the only time that Beis Hillel gives you a license to move the ladder is when it's a ladder of a shovach, but a dovecote ladder, but not the ladder of an aliyah. V'idach, so what did the sons of Rabbi Chia think? V'idach, mi katani sulam shel shovach, does it say, do we ever make explicit reference to the ladder of a shovach? Mishovach l'shovach. It just says from one dovecote to another dovecote. So it was just a mistake. The sons of Rabbi Chia thought that by definition, mishovach l'shovach was just teaching me that it doesn't really matter what kind of ladder you have. The license is to move it from one dovecote to another dovecote. Rabbi Chia said to his sons, you're mistaken. According to Beis Hillel, the license to move a ladder is only with a dovecote ladder, and ultimately, again, never with an attic ladder. Okay? Ikadami, we'll say an alternate version of that exchange. Amrulo, so same story. The sons of Rabbi Chia went out to the villages to see their fields. They come back home. Their father says to them, "No, any good shilas?" And they said, according to this version, Ikadami, Amrulo, Hitu isulam shalaliya bali adeno. We'll say what happened? Somebody came and asked us if they have an attic ladder, can they tilt it? So if I have an attic ladder, I don't need to move it. I just need to tilt it in order to access the dovecote. Is that permitted? Vitarnu, and the sons of Rabbi Chia said, we said it was mutar. Amar lahem, to which Rabbi Chia says to them, Su'u va'asru mashe tartem. You better go back out there and asr that which you permitted. So we'll say, where was their mistake? In whose savar ma'idika asr tanakama kashar Rabbi Dosa. They assumed that whatever the Tanakama asred, Rabbi Dosa permitted. And in fact, that was not true. Ma'idika shari tanakama ka'asr Rabbi Dosa. In fact, it was untrue. That which ultimately, again, ma'idika shari tanakama, it was only that which the Tanakama permitted that Rabbi Dosa asr. Okay, so I'll say again, sons of Rabbi Chia, just a misunderstanding of an inference machlokes. What exactly they misunderstood. Beautiful. So we'll say, but what can you do? You can go ahead and tilt the ladder from one dovecote to another. So remember again, we'll see the halacha l'mais in this. What you have over here is a number of machloksim happening. So remember, Beis Shammai says you cannot move the dovecote ladder on Yom Tiv. You cannot move it. So it's a machlokes exactly where they're holding that. Is it only in Rosh Hashanah but not in Rosh Hashanah? Or even in Rosh Hashanah. So we'll leave that on the side for now. But what can you do according to Beis Shammai? You could tilt it. So you can't move it. But let's say again, the dovecote ladder is situated by one opening of the dovecote. You could tilt it so you can access another chalon, another window of the dovecote. So we'll say, what do you see from here? Alma, Gabe Simchas Yomtiv, Beis Shammai l'chumra, uBeis Hillel l'kula. So we'll say, what do you see from here? You see from here that when it comes to Simchas Yom Tiv, Beis Shammai is Machmir, and ultimately Beis Hillel is Mekel. Now what does that mean? So remember again, the ability to retrieve the doves is a function of your Yom Tov enjoyment. Right? Because again, why am I retrieving doves? I want to shecht it, I want it for my Suda. So you see from here that when it comes to Simchas Yom Tiv, Beis Shammai is Machmir. How are they Machmir? They don't allow you to move the ladder. In other words, with ladder, they allow you to tilt it but not move it, but Beis Hillel allows you even to go ahead and move it. The Gemara says, well, that's interesting, because what did we just learn yesterday, or 2 days ago? Or mini, hashochet chayev ha'of b'yamtiv. If you shecht a chaya, or an oaf on yamtiv, Beis Shammai omrim yachbar badeker v'yechase. Beis Shammai says, and now we know what this phrase means. Beis Shammai says that what? If you have a shovel that was plunged into the earth when? Already Erev Yom Tov, again, in a number of different caveats, finely ground earth, passing like Rabbi Abba, all from yesterday's daf. Beis Shammai says you can go ahead and do Kisei Hadam. Beis Hillel say, Lo yishchot ele imkin hayolo efer or afar muchan miba'od yom. And Beis Hillel says, you cannot cover the blood unless, of course, what? You had dirt prepared from before Yom Tov. So understand what this means. You have a chaya, you have a deer, that you want to shecht on Yom Tiv. So Beis Shammai will say, no problem, as long as you pretty much have dirt ready. And again, ready, we're using that term very loosely, because ready can mean what? All you need is a shovel in the ground, and you're good to go. Right? You could shecht. Beis Hillel will say, the only time you could shecht the chaya is when? If you mamish have an active pile of dirt ready. So you see over here, that Beis Hillel is machmir, and Beis Shammai is mekel. So what's going on over here? So we'll say from our Mishnah that we just read about the dovecoat, it sounds like Beis Shammai is machmir by Simchas Yom Tov and Beis Hillel is mekel. Yet based on what we saw before by Kisei Hadam, it's Beis Shammai who is mekel and Beis Hillel who's machmir. Rabbi Yochanan muchlef es hashita. Rabbi Yochanan says no problem, switch stuff around. Our Mishnah got mixed up, and in fact, it's Beis Shammai who allows you to move the ladder, and Beis Hillel says you're not allowed to. Beis Shammai is mekel by Simchas Yom Tov, and Beis Shammai is mekel by Simchas Yom Tov, and Beis Hillel is machmir. Rashi says muchlef es hashita kan hochlef hashitasan v'tzarech lahafok tivreim. Switch it around. To which the Gemara says, well, maybe not. In other words, we'll say that's just to say switch it around presupposes that these two cases have to align with each other, but maybe not. Here we go. Mimai dilma ad kano karan Beis Shammai hasam elahecha diika deker notes. So we'll say it's possible that Beis Shammai is mekel in the case of Kisei Hadam. Why? Because you already have a shovel plunged into this. Well, so remember again, let's go back to yesterday's daf. Remember, we essentially set up the case of Decker nodes with three criteria. Number one, the shovels in the earth. With the shovels in the earth, what does that take care of? Little Chazar, what does that take care of? Choresh, right? It's not plowing. Then we also said it's afar tichuach, right? It's fine earth, which takes care of what? Kisisha, right? Goes at it grinding. And lastly, we pass like Rabbi Abba, who holds that what? That if you dig a hole, remember, digging a hole could be potentially a problem of what? Bone, eh? But we pass like Rabbi Abba, who holds that what? That if you dig the hole, not for the hole, but for what? For what? For the dirt, that you're going to be pater. So it could be that in that case, Beis Shammai is mekel, because you've got all of those criteria met. Aval hecha deleka dekar, no, it's low. Beis Shammai wouldn't just allow you to dig up dirt on Yom Tov to go out and do Kisei Hadam. In other words, Beis Shammai is not necessarily, Beis Shammai is allowing that because you already have the dirt, you already have the shovel in the earth. But if you didn't have that, they wouldn't allow you to do that. Furthermore, it could be over here that Beis Shammai allows you to move the ladder. Why? Meaning, in other words, your dovecoat. See, Abba says, we mentioned before, the fact that you have a dovecoat, that shows that the reason you're moving the ladder is to retrieve the doves, not to go ahead and do any kind of home repairs. Aval hasam lo, but Kisei Hadam, he'll be machmir. So we'll say, all the Gemara is trying to suggest like this. The Gemara is trying to pose a shaila. And the shaila was, from our Mishnah, you see that Beis Hillel is mekel by Simchas Yom Tov, and Beis Shammai is machmir. But how does that shtim? How does that go with what we learned before? Because by the case of Kisei Hadam, Beis Shammai is mekel, Beis Hillel is machmir. So first answer, muchlef es hashita. Switch around the attributions in our Mishnah, and in fact, again, it's Beis Shammai who allows you to move the ladder. Beis Hillel doesn't allow you to do so. To which the Gemara says, calm down. Maybe not. Who says that the two Mishnayos have to align? They're two different cases, and what drives Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel in both cases may just be different. Elai kasha akasha. So the truth is, but if you do have a question, right, if you have a contradiction to be posed, here's the contradiction. I will say this is fascinating. Beis Shammai Omrim. Beis Shammai says as follows. Yo lo yitol. I will say this is talking about taking eggs on Yom Tov. I should say chicks, not really eggs, chicks. Rashi says, lo yitol min agozlos. If you want to take chicks on Yom Tov, ela imkein nanea or ninea mi ba'od yom. So let's listen to this. Beis Shammai says that in order to take chicks on Yom Tov, what do you have to do? On Erev Yom Tov, you have to go into the coop and you have to pick up each one you're going to take. Right? I'm going to take this one, put it back down. This one, put it back down. I do that on Erev Yom Tov. And that designates those chicks for use on Yom Tov. Beis Hillel say no. Omed v'omer, all you need to do is stand next to the coop and say, Zeh v'zeh ani noto. I'm going to take this one, and this one. You have to verbally designate, but you need not what? Pick up each one. What do you see from here? Alma, gabe simchas Yom Tov, Beis Shammai l'chumra, u'Beis Hillel l'kula. What do you see from here? So when it comes to simchas Yom Tov, Beis Shammai is machmir, and Beis Hillel is mekel. Okay, here's the problem. Or minhi hashochet chayva of biyam tiv. But say the problem with that is we go back to the last Mishnah which is that when it comes to Kisei Hadam on Yom Tiv, so the Gemara says, remember, in that case, Beis Shammai is Mekel and Beis Hillel is Machmir. So what's going on over here? Rabbi Yochanan Muchlefes Hashita. So Rabbi Yochanan says, no problem, switch around the Shitos. Right? It's just wrong attribution. And in fact, again, Beis Shammai, who is Mekel by Kisei Hadam, will be the one that by the chicks will say, all you need to do Erev Yom Tov is go ahead and say, I'm going to use that one, I'm going to use that one, I'm going to use that one. And Beis Hillel, who is Machmir by Kisei Hadam, is the one who will say you actually have to pick up each one you're going to use. To which the Gemara says, no, Lohi, once again, I will say, here's what's amazing. There's an incredible Mosar Haskell in this. Human nature is that sometimes we want all of the pieces to align. Right? We often want everything to just form a comprehensive, unified picture. So, and therefore, again, the easy way to say is Muchlefes Hashita. But sometimes, again, the Gemara says, not everything has to fall in line. In other words, different situations in life are just treated differently, and not everything necessarily follows one stream of thought or one unified approach. So the Gemara says, "Look, ad kan lo kami Beis Shammai elecha dika neker dots." The only reason Beis Shammai was mekel by the case of Kisei Hadam was why? Because you had a shovel that was already in the ground. In other words, halacha lemaisa, that dirt, so to speak, was already prepared. Top of yud. No. But if at the end of the day, you did not have a shovel in the ground, Beis Shammai would not allow you to do Kisei Hadam. Inami, ad kanokran Beis Hillel hacha, elakevan demuktzehu, ba'omed va'omer zev za'aninot al sagi. Furthermore, again, I will say, in the case of the chicks, again, we'll talk about the case of the chicks. The only problem with the chicks, we will say, is the problem of muktzah. And the only thing you need to do to transform an item from being muktzah to being non-muktzah is what? Right. Designation. Right? That's really all you need. And verbal designation is enough. So in other words, it's just what the Gemara is saying is just two different cases. So by the chicks, all I need is a designation. And therefore to be able to stand by the coop and say, I'll use this one, I'll use this one, I'll use this one, that works. You don't need anything more than that. However, aval hosam, but by the case of Kisei Hadam, we spoke about that by the case of Kisei Hadam, remember, we'll say, one act of digging up dirt could lead you to what? 3 potential malachas. Charisha, Kesisha, and Bona. So Beis Hillel will say, in that type of case, you have to be much more machmir. So if Rabbi say, we'll stop over here for today, but just understand we're kind of leaving off in the middle of the discussion, which is that halacha l'maisa, we're trying to figure out from our Mishnah of the dovecoat, it has the appearance that Beis Shammai is the machmir by Simchas Yom Tiv, and Beis Hillel is the mekel. Because Beis Hillel allows you to move the ladder, Beis Shammai doesn't allow you to move the ladder. Even though I just want to point out that according to Beis, remember, the underlying issue over here is a Maris Ayin issue, not a Simchas Yom Tov issue. In any event, we're just trying to figure out how to go ahead and reconcile that with other positions of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. We'll stop over here. Meretz Hashem will pick up with this discussion Meretz Hashem tomorrow. Shkoyach.